Morning. One of the hardest questions for me is, where are you from? Here's the beginning. I grew up as a faculty kid on college campuses. My dad was an administrator and my mom was a teacher, so schools are in my blood. Afternoons of athletics and just walking around, chatting to people while watching the games have been some of my favorite memories. Playing hide and seek as a kid, pushing Philip around in a stroller at Canterbury, and bouncing from hockey to basketball to wrestling here, while a pack of kids are always 3 steps ahead. But I still feel a sense of wanderlust, that even in the comfort of the familiar, there's still a hunger for the new, for the unknown. When I was 9, we moved from Western Mass to Wisconsin. Relatively early, I met my best friend, Eric, whose dad also worked at Beloit College. I remember always being afoot, running around under the bleachers, playing, chasing in the elevators of the athletic center, or the satisfaction of shoving Eric into the swimming pool. These echoes of campus life resonate with me, hearkening back to my childhood as I watch faculty kids playing these same games today. After high school, I went to college in Iowa, following in my older sister's footsteps and picking a school of fun nerds where, as you might expect, I fit in. But after more safe Midwestern familiarity, my friends and I needed something new. So 8 of us then moved to Austin, Texas, renting 2 houses in a city where we had neither jobs nor connections. We were inspired by the real-world Austin, which was like our generation's version of Love Island. In fact, I ended up answering phone calls for small internet providers, going to the occasional concert, and paying lots of bills. But after 2 years of adulthood, one of my Grinnell buddies called me from China, gushing, "Come out to China, man, you'll love it." My work environment then didn't exactly have me striving for the most meaningful educational experience of my life. So, a couple weeks later, I was in St. Louis for my cousin's wedding. My parents, having just returned from Japan, wanted to know what my plans were for the end of May when my lease was up. "You can move in with us," they said. 2 months later, I was in China. While I had read a book about living in China and knew I could probably get a job teaching English, it was still a pretty big gamble to move somewhere I'd never been, without a job, where I couldn't even say hello, and think it would just work out. But it made sense to explore this wanderlust aspect of mine. My first babysitter, a Mount Holyoke College student, was from Sri Lanka. I'd lived abroad before, in Scotland and Greece, but knew China would be different. So, in July 2008, after a 14-hour trans-Pacific flight to Hong Kong, I found myself speeding across bridges of steel cables and light, crossing the border into China and Shenzhen. I found myself living in the scenes of movies I had watched. As I was being herded through different lines and getting my baggage scanned through metal detectors, and then the final step of stamping the passport, and understanding nothing of the people talking around me, I knew this was going to be a little different from living in Scotland or Greece. Arriving in Chengdu, I met my new roommate, Sam. He had a spare bedroom and needed a roommate, and I needed somewhere to live and someone who spoke enough Chinese to order me a meal. There was a great dumpling shop in our neighborhood, but more on that later. We walked up the 5 flights to our 2-bedroom apartment, replete with rats, bugs, and cages around the windows. After dropping off my bags, we walked to a neighborhood dumpling shop, and I had my first real Chinese dumplings, zhong shui jiao, the same type of dumplings that my wife makes and that many of you have had before. The meal cost a little more than $1. That night, Sam made me find our way home. "I'm not going to hold your hand, and I'm not going to be your mom," he said. That first week, I started a Chinese notebook, learning how to count, ask how much, and walk the streets of our neighborhood, making a mental map of the coffee shop, bookstore, the small mini parks, the handful of restaurants that we visited, and my favorite dishes. I listened and watched and took notes, an ethnographer living in a foreign culture. Chengdu is a subtropical metropolis of small side streets shaded with bamboo and ginkgo trees, tiny restaurants and large tea houses perched next to the river. Its spicy hot pot and lively nightlife convinced me that this was the city in China for me. While I spent weekends playing rugby in cities around China with friends from New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, and France, I found cities like Shanghai and Beijing too fast and obsessed with change and money. But Chengdu's slower pace suited me, with its milder weather and food-obsessed locals. The neighborhood that I lived in, Jade Forest, had motor scooters zipping around sloth-like grandmas, and honking taxis outside walk-up communist apartment blocks from the 70s. It felt both sublime and street. I was living in the transition between China's past and its future. I wish I could say I met my wife in a 300-year-old tea house or while taking a kung fu class, but it was in a busy Starbucks downtown. Yes, Starbucks. I was hunched over Chinese calligraphy and glanced up at a beautiful woman who caught my eye. I started chatting with her in my broken Chinese, hoping that she understood that I was American, 25 years old, and most importantly, single. I understood that she liked watching movies. I was not the fluent Chinese speaker that I am today. I made the best decision of my life, and just over 2 years later, I married her. My life has always been a global one. From my parents and their travel habits, which I've inherited, to the 5 spice and garlic, olive oil, and Sichuan pepper that stock the 2 sides of our pantry. If it's congee or pancakes for breakfast, Philip is happy either way. We switch languages within a single sentence, read books in Chinese and English, watch movies with Chinese subtitles, and have friends over for dumpling parties and Texas barbecue. So, as a white guy who teaches Chinese, I'm someone who has 2 identities. And because my wife comes from another culture, there will always be things that I need to explain and that I need explained to me. But it keeps things interesting, and it means that when I approach a problem, an experience, or a story, I'm always seeing it from multiple angles. And the coolest thing is seeing that in my son, who has grown up bilingual, biracial, bicultural, as a kid who's comfortable eating spicy dumplings and donuts, who loves to read in 2 languages, and has grandparents on 2 continents. It'll be fun to see how he answers that same question. Where are you from? Thank you.